Become a sustaining champion of West Hill United's work by committing to an automatic monthly donation. Learn more or donate now through Canada Helps. West Hill United is a progressive spiritual community where how you live is more important than what you believe. West Hill United is a people, a place, an idea. We are a community living out of a progressive faith, striving to make a positive difference in our own lives, the lives of others, and the world. Join us Sundays at 10:30 a.m. or connect with us at any time.
We'll turn things back over to you for the readings, Jean.
Thank you, Babette. We have some readings today. These are two items from the advices and queries of the Canadian yearly meeting of the Religious Society of Friends. And as customary, at the end of the readings, we add the phrase, customarily, offered as wisdom for the journey. You are invited to respond with the phrase, may we walk in its light. You are not required to respond. You can respond silently. You can respond not at all, but it's an invitation to respond if you wish to. May we walk in its light. The first reading. Are you alert to practices here and throughout the world which discriminate against people on the basis of who or what they are, or because of their beliefs? Bear witness to the humanity of all people, including those who break society's conventions or its laws. Try to discern new growing points in social and economic life. Seek to understand the causes of injustice, social unrest, and fear. Are you working to bring about a just and compassionate society which allows everyone to develop their capacities and fosters a desire to serve? The second reading. Are you honest and truthful in all you say and do? Do you maintain strict integrity in business transactions and in your dealing with individuals and organizations? Do you use money and information entrusted to you with discretion and responsibility? Taking oaths implies a double standard of truth. In choosing to affirm instead, be aware of the claim to integrity that you are making. Offered as wisdom for the journey.
May we walk
in its
light.
Babette, over to you for more music.
Thanks, Jean. And we're ready. If you feel like standing, please do so. And if you're more comfortable staying.
Nicely said, Babette. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Today, when we introduce our guests at West Hill, we usually give a list of some of their achievements, things which we think are noteworthy. But in many ways, I think it's inadequate. When we look at a tin of, for example, tomato soup, we think it's just tomato soup. But actually, it's so much more than that. Looking in the back, you will see a long list of ingredients that makes up this tomato soup. And it's the same with our speaker today. I can list some of his achievements, some of the things that tell us what he's done during his life. For example, he studied maths and philosophy. He's a software programmer. He's a Quaker. He's of Jewish heritage. He grew up in an agnostic family. But these don't paint the whole picture. When we listen to Dan talking today, we'll learn more about the person that is Dan Cooperstock. So I'm very happy to hand over to Dan. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you, John. Okay, so for my second perspective, after a few different suggestions of what I might talk about, we came up with the idea of sharing some stories and experiences from my life, with particular attention to how my values were reflected in them. I want to preface all of this by saying that I'm far from perfect, and I have things I've done in the past that I'm not proud of. Obviously, I will be mostly highlighting the things that reflect my positive values in the hopes that they may be inspirational. I'd like to start by sharing the chorus of a Sunday school hymn I learned at the summer camp I attended from ages about 8 to 18. Dare to be a Daniel, dare to stand alone, dare to have a purpose firm, dare to make it known. Thank you, Scott. Some of you may be familiar with that. The chorus always resonated with me, given the match to my first name, but it really does speak to my condition, as Quakers like to say. I do tend to be someone who speaks up, questions authority, and doesn't always go along with the prevailing opinions, though not for the sake of it, only when it is something I strongly believe. Some of that will come out in some of these stories. I hope it will encourage you to go and do likewise. So a very simple example would be how in university I'd often be the one who would ask the stupid question of the professor, a question which others subsequently told me they wanted to ask too, or they were wondering about too, but didn't want to be seen to ask. Another theme for me is my strong reactions against injustice and unfairness, whether to me or others. Here are two small stories about that. When I was a teenager, I was very into superhero comic books, which of course are very much about fighting for justice, although some of them get a little more subtle than that. There was one comic book shop I went to fairly often, and one time when I got there, they said, "No, you can't come in. You stole comic books the last time you were here." Well, I hadn't, and I was very upset about, being banned. It seemed very unfair and unjust, and there was nothing I can do about it. These weren't the days of closed circuit cameras or anything that I could ask them to show me the coverage. So about a year later, I think, and I think at the encouragement of my parents, I finally went back, told them what had happened, which I suspect they didn't even remember by then, and asked to be let back in, and it worked. So I don't know what that proves, but so I was also into watching professional wrestling when I was a teen, such as the current WWE. The reason I quit watching it eventually was probably an unusual reason to do so. I hated the injustice of the fact that the referees sided with the bad guys rather than the good guys. I don't like to see anyone get away with cheating, whether it's in fictional situations like that, or at least scripted situations, because we all know professional wrestling is scripted, or for instance, the very rich paying too little taxes, a little more, to the point. Another major influence in my life has been my involvement in what is now known as LGBTQ+, and sometimes some more letters that I don't always manage to get out, with those struggles and communities. Although my real relationship experience has always been with women, for whatever reason, knowing about and supporting the LGBTQ community and my friends in that community have been extremely important to me for a very long time. From age 18 or so, I was subscribing to and avidly reading The Body Politic, Toronto's gay newspaper, and I marched in the rallies against the 1981 bathhouse raids. Also in 1981, I went to my first Friends General Conference gathering. That's the annual gathering of liberal Quakers, usually held in the USA, at that time drawing 1,500 or more friends annually. Again, friends is what we call Quakers. For some unknown reason, I got put into the gay dorm that first year, which allowed me to get to know the folks there and become part of what is now known as FLGBTQC, Friends for Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender, and Queer Concerns. Somebody made up a way to remember that. I remember this isn't in my script. FLGBTQC, aren't you very proud of me? I don't know how that helps you remember what the words are, but I guess it helps you remember the acronym. Anyways, okay. So I stayed active with them, including some committee service for many years as I continued to go to that large conference, and I also went several times to FLGBTQC's annual, much smaller midwinter gathering that, well, we would have up to 100 or so people at that. Obviously, this involvement is part of my belief in the Quaker testimony of equality, but it's also personal. In some ways, I identify as queer. For a while, I identified as bisexual, and I've definitely learned that I'm biromantic, which means I'm able to have romantic feelings for a member of my own gender, even if I don't tend to have sexual feelings for them. When my local Quaker meeting and Canadian yearly meeting, our national body, or within it, I became part of a struggle that took many years, given our non-voting business method that I told you a bit about the last time I spoke, took many years to prove same-sex marriage. And I was part of that struggle. For a while, before Ontario approved it legally, I was appointed by my meeting to be on an interfaith body pushing for same-sex marriage, which was quite interesting and exciting. I'm actually one of a few marriage officers for my meeting because we don't have clergy, so we just appoint marriage officers. The province thinks of us as clergy. I was blessed to officiate at the 2 such marriages that have occurred in it so far, same-sex marriages. I don't say I married those couples because the Quaker view is that they marry each other, but you do need an official to sign the paperwork, etc. After my first marriage broke up in 1993, I realized I'd need some more things to fill my time, and I started dancing with the Triangle Squares, which is Toronto's LGBTQ square dancing club, modern Western square dancing, technically. So much fun. I did that for about 20 years, including trying to learn how to do square dance calling, which is hard, at least to get good at. I also learned early on in my time of square dancing that I was another kind of bi, which is bidansual. Bidansual means you can dance the boys' part or the girls' part equally well. So, my parents, who grew up in the USA, were both sociologists and both very left-wing, with my father having been a member of the Communist Party until he learned about the excesses of Stalinism when many people left. My mother was a fellow traveler, as they say, and they moved to Saskatchewan in 1951 to escape McCarthyism, and I was born there. So unsurprisingly, I inherited my politics from them. At the University of Toronto, when I became a teaching assistant in my 3rd or 4th year, I think, I joined the Union for Teaching Assistants, became the shop steward for the computer science department, and a few years later, when I was in grad school, I became its president, and the year after that, its treasurer. Among many other things, we were struggling, largely unsuccessfully, sadly, for fair working hours, especially in the arts. Many teaching assistants who were paid for 10 hours a week, the maximum you were allowed to work, had to work twice that much to finish their assigned work, including tutorials, prep, and marking. And of course, there was no overtime pay. When it came time for bargaining a new contract, I realized I had a problem with the usual bargaining process because it's confrontational rather than trying to achieve consensus, as I like from Quaker business meetings. It involves one side saying, we must have these improvements and pay raises, etc., and the other side saying, oh, we can't possibly pay for that. It seemed to me that both sides were required to stretch the truth to say those things, given that they both knew they'd probably settle somewhere in the middle. My love for truthfulness led me to stay off the bargaining team and let others do it. However, I'm not sure I would make the same decision if I was in the same situation again today, but that's where I was at the time. Professionally, as mentioned, I'm a computer programmer or a software designer, whatever you want to call it, and I had some interesting values-related experiences in some of my jobs, several of which, the first ones I'm going to mention, led me to leave each of those jobs. My first job was in 1982 for a small software company that did custom solutions for businesses and a bit of government. However, it seemed that regularly the boss would make deals based on just a handshake of what he would do. We'll do this and that and the other thing, and it'll cost this much. And then he would deliver less than that and say, oh, no, that's what we agreed to. That seemed rather dishonest to me. I grew rather disillusioned and left after a bit. 2 years, I think. I think it probably took me a while to sufficiently notice that, and it was fun. In a later job, I was made part of a group tasked with creating a very ambitious program that was relatively unrelated to what the rest of the business was doing. After about 6 months, I could see that the three of us on that team doing that just didn't have the expertise and knowledge to really create what they wanted us to create in a successful way. So I went and talked to management about it. I said, look, this is my impression. And they said, oh, no, just keep working. It's fine, blah, blah, blah. And I just didn't think that made sense, so I quit. And they dropped that project about a year later. A bit sad that it took them that way. Now, when I was thinking about this talk like yesterday, I was thinking, well, what's my principle there? Because some of these things have obvious principles about honesty, truthfulness, whatever. And I think it's partly like, I want to be useful in my work. And if I'm creating somebody that nobody's ever going to use because it's not going to be succeed, then I'm not useful. And I usually just didn't want the business to be wasting its money paying us to do something that wasn't going to be successful. I still don't know exactly where those things fit into what I would sort of list as my general principles, but anyways, it's an interesting thought. In another job, our company made really cool 3D design and animation software. At the time, that software was very expensive. I think about $50,000 for like one copy of the software. It came about that a sale was going to go to the US military. I'm a pacifist, and I really did not want to work even very indirectly for the US military. And I particularly thought that, that software could be used to design weapons, which really didn't appeal. I don't have a problem with who buys the software when it's like a commodity product, a much cheaper commodity product like what I make now. But I couldn't live with that for the military, and I left that job. So, as some of you know, I'm the author of 2 software programs for churches and charities, which I started out giving away for free after I wrote the first of the programs for my Quaker meeting. I'd helped them choose a similar program a few years earlier, but it started falling apart, and I realized I could write something better. Quite a while after that, in 2007, I decided to quit my then job and work full-time on it, and eventually grew into a 4-person business, which I sold last year, and I'm still working for the new owners. After the sale, there was a fair bit of conflict with the new owners as we had somewhat different values, and it took quite a while to settle down into an acceptable working relationship. While they shared my desire to serve the nonprofit community with affordable yet powerful software, we differed in things like outsourcing labor. They actually got rid of all of my employees within the first year, and used more outsourced labor. And also differed about the degree of transparency to our users of what we're doing and what's going on, et cetera. They also cut support hours way back from what my staff and I had been doing to more conventional office hours levels, which I understood. Their saying was that we were offering Hilton service at Motel 6 prices. So I got that, but still it was very different from what I'd been doing. I had always cleared the inbox the first thing when I got up, right before I went to bed, did support all weekend. The other staff did some of the support, daytimes, but nevertheless. It was really hard for me to stop doing first level support, which they eventually asked me to do, and leave that to the new staff they hired. because I just felt so much responsibility for my customers. There were many ways my values came out when I was running the business. I'm very big on truthfulness and transparency. So that was reflected in clear pricing on the website. Many competitors, basically require to write for a price. It's not all posted. I published honest information about the numbers of users and admitted mistakes. Every time there's a new release, the help file would include these bugs were fixed, explain exactly what was wrong and what was fixed, unless it was like so trivial. I wouldn't write about wording, but anything that was an actual bug. I had web pages where I mentioned other competitors' products with appropriate links in case potential users got to us and then realized they needed something different. I tried to explain with clear rationales any price increases with a good amount of warning before they happened. I shared my business's financial statements with my employees, not my customers. And I tried to have consensus decision-making among us, although there were times when I felt I had to put my foot down if nobody agreed with me, and I felt strongly. On a personal front, my first marriage broke up when my wife decided she really wanted to have a child. We'd both been pretty ambivalent about that going into the marriage, and she made it an ultimatum about staying together. I just wasn't interested in being a parent for whatever reason. And while many people said to me, "Oh, just do it, you'll find you love it," I wasn't really willing to take that chance. It seemed to me much worse to have a child and then break up if it wasn't working for me. Admittedly, there were other things wrong with that relationship. So in a way, it wasn't as hard a decision as it might have been, I suppose. This is just a very small, personal, recent story. Very recently, I stopped in a restaurant near my house for a quick dinner before an evening meeting. I think actually it was the last board meeting that I was coming to audit. I was wearing my mask, as you've seen I do when I'm in among people. And it's because I have a lung condition, and so I'm more cautious about COVID. I generally keep the mask on in restaurants except when I'm eating or if I'm really far away from people, but that wasn't the situation. So there was a group just drinking at another table, and one woman kept staring at me. I sort of noticed it, and eventually she said something about my mask. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was negative. Another woman at her table told her to stop and that everyone had a right to make their own decisions, which I appreciated. When it came time for the bill, the owner told me the meal was on him. I said, "Well, why?" And he said, "Well, I feel badly about what happened to you, what that woman said." And I said, "Well, that's none of your responsibility. No, let me pay." And we had to go back and forth a couple of times, but he did let me pay. And it's sort of, fair pay for fair work, And I know that restaurants have a very hard time making a living, so yeah. I'm going to end up with just a few stories about standing up for truth and universal humanist values. In Quaker meetings, especially at the national level, I've sometimes stood up for opinions contrary to the vastly prevailing views. I remember speaking out years ago about an entirely pro-Palestinian minute that was being proposed with no acknowledgement of there being issues on both sides of that struggle. I also remember more than once supporting nuclear energy when others were largely against it. And most recently, last year, I withdrew from most national level business activities over a concern that too much of the important business had been changed to being done by too few people rather than sort of the larger group Quaker decision-making that I thought was appropriate for it. Given that almost nobody was speaking up in agreement with the concerns I was expressing about that, it seemed that it would be best both for the body and its business process to not have me always jumping up and arguing, and for my stress levels to withdraw. In general, Other Quakers do tend to respect my contributions, whether they agree with them or not, because I speak very rationally and without anger. The story I believe I told you in my first perspective talk about getting into shouting matches in the business meetings when we were trying to approve same-sex marriage in my local meeting is not one I'm proud of, and it was a very long time ago. Toronto Oasis, which I was involved with from its start in early 2017 until this year, and I was on the leadership team of it for most of that time, was definitely an opportunity for growing in wisdom, as we say here, through the many presentations and discussions about them that we had. It also led me to learn a lot more about things I knew comparatively little about, including racism and anti-racism. Sadly, my leaving Toronto Oasis and its leadership team was related to a principled issue for me that involved defending another member. Both that person and I were not in agreement with what seemed to us to be an ideological position that was being implicitly taken by some of the leadership team, and that we didn't feel was appropriate for the group. That's a complex story that I still haven't fully processed. My final story is about the last time I attended an FLGBTQC business meeting at that Friends General Conference gathering where I first discovered them. This was just before COVID. There's a very active People of Color Center within the Friends General Conference gathering, and they had written a minute that they asked FLGBTQC to also support, like approve the same minute. And it included a sentence that said, essentially, all Quaker meetings are white supremacist. Given that truth, which I sometimes use with a capital T, because I think there's a real meaning there, given that truth is an important principle for us, I objected to that, based both on the fact that nobody has attended all Quaker meetings, and that the conventional, most understood meaning of white supremacist refers to people like, you know, the KKK, Nazis. I understood that there were academic meanings that were more technical, but I didn't think we should be using them. I also knew that the very active people of color in my meeting would not agree with that statement, which I confirmed with them. If it had said something like, Quaker meetings are part of a culture imbued with systemic racism and cannot help be affected by it, I would have had no problem with approving the statement. The minute was, in fact, approved despite my disagreement. I was the only one disagreeing. So I hope this somewhat non-standard style of perspective has been worthwhile. I'll leave you with a Quaker quote from George Fox, who's sort of generally considered to be the founder of Quakerism, although it's a little more complicated than that. He said, Christ saith this, the apostles say this, but what canst thou say? Or to put it in modern language related to this talk, how do your values influence the actions in your life? Do you let your life speak and put your values into practice? Of course, that may be in very different ways from how I do it, because we all have different aspects of our principles and values that are most important to us. Thank you for listening.
Become a sustaining champion of West Hill United's work by committing to an automatic monthly donation. Learn more or donate now through Canada Helps.